active record, I'm going to talk about Mongo Mapper primarily, but active Mongo record was their initial port for active record on top of Mongo. It works. There's we have code in production that actually uses it. Certain aspects of it are actually better than Mongo Mapper, but all in all, we like the Mongo Mapper ORM better. It's just more advanced. 10gen is spread across all the different technologies. I mean, there's Python bindings and all that that they're supporting. So having a guy like Nudemaker that is pouring every bit into Mongo Mapper has kind of eclipsed the usefulness of Mongo Record. So Mongo Mapper. So these are the opinions that he had going in. So Mongo is not MySQL, so why build Mongo Mapper to look like active record just for the sake of it, right? These are the reasons why I did it. We wanted to play around with the DSL for it. It sounded like fun. Just released version 0.56, and I bet you if I did a gym list, I'm on 4.3 or something. I mean, he's blowing and going on this deal. And yeah, I voted for new members. Features of Mongo Mapper typecasting. So get to the syntax in just a second, but each of the fields in your objects are typed as you would expect, strings, integers, things of that sort. Callbacks, so before save, after save, before create. Validations, as you would expect. You can have different connections to different databases per document, which is kind of weird since we have sharding, but it's in there, it supports it. Multiple inserts, so you can actually pass back multiple rows and do an update in batch. The dynamic finders, as you would expect, find all by last name works, just as you would in active record. The ordering can be tricky. Except for cap collections, Mongo doesn't store the insert order, since the IDs are these big, long hashes, right? Look like GUIDs in the database world. So it defaults to something called $natural, where it assumes some certain things based on some criteria that there's a natural sort order based on field names and things of that sort. Very unreliable, so it's usually better to explicitly say a created at or updated at or some integer ordinal that you can order by and get that back out if you're not using the cap collection. An association, so it has belong to, has many, just like you'd expect in an active record. So here's the syntax. Find your fields. First thing to note is the note down here. It's included as a module, not as a subclass. A lot of people can't wrap their head around this. It's a pretty common Ruby construct, right? Just included as a module. This may change. There's been some grumblings on the group of, since this is implemented this way, it makes it difficult to port a lot of plugins that assume an active record-y type subclass pattern. So that may change. But this is how you define your fields. So here we have a user and an address. Each of them have fields that are strongly typed, even validations inline, whether or not they're required, length, things of that sort. And then a user has one address and many articles, which isn't pictured here, so pretty straightforward. Other things that you can do in Mongo, we talked about cap collection, upserts. Upserts are the bomb. So we noticed a big performance boost when we started bypassing Mongo Mapper, whatever ORM we were using, and dropping down directly to MongoDB's upsert functionality. Basically, you get a constraint, in this case ID1, which is not self-explanatory. Think username penguin or whatever, right? So something that's going to be unique, any unique constraint that it can check against, and then you give it your the rest of the hash for the values, and it will do an upsert. If that record is there, it'll update it. If not, it'll insert one shot, which is pretty cool. This particular example uses $inc, which is an increment functionality. So instead of having to read a row, figure out what your counter cache is, update it, and write it back to the database, at the server level, you pass in inc1, and it's going to say, for that column used, it's going to increment it by 1 at the server level, which is pretty cool. Fire and forget. Multi-keys, cool for things like tagging. GridFS, built-in file system storage within the database. We've used this for like logo uploads and things like that. Instead of having to mess with S3 and replication and things of that sort, we just store them directly in the database, and that way, where the data goes, we've got our assets right there with it. So, a question we get a lot is, MongoDB ready for prime time? These are the folks that are using it. We've got another application called TweetSaver in production. I just found out that Mozilla's Ubiquity project, we got a herd server-side project that catalogs Ubiquity commands is using it. The big one up there is Discuss. Anybody use Discuss for the comments for WordPress? Or, they're using Mongo on the back end now. SourceForge, I'm not sure how ringing endorsement that is. Maybe it'll get faster. So, lessons that we learned. Number one, the laws of computing are still in effect, not suspended just because you use Mongo. Things like indexes actually matter. So, for TweetSaver, have we crossed the 1 million tweet mark yet?
Yesterday.
So, over 1 million tweets in one collection. Worked fine when I had 2,000 tweets in my local, doing things like, find mentions where it matches at Penguin, right? You get 300,000 rows in there. Like, whoa, can't do this. So where you may want to cheat and use things like regex or something like that to find something in a string, it's better if you can to index those. So we have like keyword columns. So for full text insert and full text search and things like that, there's third-party tools like Zapier or Sphinx that people are writing bindings for to do that. But the quick and dirty approach is just to index the fields that you want into an array and use in or all to match that. It works really, really well. So the question earlier was, how do you model these, deep or wide? And the answer is yes. So it really depends on, we've had conversations around, because there's a purist in you that you still can't let go of some of your relational ways to say, this is how you model data. I'm not going to store this in 2 spots, especially if I'm going to have to update this data. There are certain times when you say, get over it. I'll update it in 2 spots if I need to update it in 2 spots. And it all hinges on how am I going to read the data out. There are certain times where MapReduce may change a lot of this for us. We went wide instead of deep, basically because we need to return top-level objects for each of these, which was difficult before MapReduce came about. But now that MapReduce is here, I may be able to go, show me all of the users that have an article with this tag. You pull back users instead of articles. Cool thing about the project is both MongoDB team and the Mongo Mapper team in John are very responsive. This also leads to a lot of volatile changes. Typically, it's heads up, new version, at both at the server and the ORM level, which makes you kind of want to, makes you gun shy, especially having something in production. Well, I don't know if I want to upgrade this, right? On the server side, every upgrade's been very minimal except for the last one with 1.1. I'm not sure what 1.2 is going to have in store. Actually had to update the database in the back end, which was a new thing. For Mongo Mapper, seems like every release has had its own opinions that got changed along the way, where now we're storing IDs as strings as opposed to the object ID type that Mongo has built in. So just a gotcha that you may want to tread lightly and not cling too much to edge. So how can you help? We need a lot of smart people, and I think a lot of smart people in this room. So if somebody wants to create an awesome admin GUI, maybe in MacRuby, that would be nice. Something like SQL Pro that I could see on my data. Like Futon. I know there's somebody out there that's porting Futon to Mongo. The last I saw was a straight up port, included a lot of things that did not really map to Mongo things, but I'm sure it's going to get more polished. Help port some plugins. Somebody was asking about authentication earlier, like RESTful auth or something like that would be nice to have some switches in some of these plugins to say my ORM, just like we had for Data Mapper when it came out, right? I'm using Mongo as my backend data store. You really shouldn't care that this isn't SQL, so mind your business. Go build something cool, cool with Mongo Mapper that we all can use. We do some resources. MongoDB website, Tenjin's website, two lists. And this gives you guys provide some consulting on Mongo if you want to get up and running. And I'm putting one on Twitter if you have any questions. Sure.
What about delayed job? Right now that's dependent on active record. Has anyone done anything to...
I haven't seen anybody port delayed job. Trying to go off memory, delayed job, I think it's just one model job, right? Shouldn't be that difficult. But the thing about it is, it's not an all or nothing proposition. I think every one of our apps are a hybrid. We're not running Mongo for authentication. I mean, there's no use case beyond having the user data in one spot. A lot of times we'll have an authentication scheme that's got the user data in MySQL. And if that data maps to Mongo types 2, we'll either store it in Mongo as well. I know in TweetSaver we're doing that. With, in some cases, it's simply a lazy load find to say this object dot user is not an association, it's just a MySQL. Because you can still use active record, call it from your Mongo model. These are just Ruby objects, right? So it's not an all or nothing baby bathwater type deal.
So with the DB refs, I mean, what can you do with them exactly?
Save space.
I mean, is there
give a better answer.
Can you do joins? I mean, is there that kind of concept? Or?
Not as far as I recall, because you can't query them at all. Is mine. So basically, I think you could just, in doing the dot notation from a Mongo driver side, I think it just pulls it back automatically.
It's so, the way I understand is collections are totally contiguous disk space,
right?
And so you can break up your disk space then,
gotcha,
with multiple collections, whether or not that's an advantage.
Right. I've never seen a ringing endorsement for, hey, this is a DB ref, right? Who's like, here's the gotchas of DB ref. Oh, okay.
You said a lot of it's in memory. What kind of memory requirements are you looking at?
Do yourself a favor, I didn't mention that. If you're going to run this, run it on 64-bit. We got bit hard by the Twitpocalypse deal when the tweets went over the whatever size that was. Because we were running 32-bit Mongo, at least in our development environments. Why, I don't know, because we had 64-bit operating systems, lazy to pull out the 32-bit version, I guess. There's the memory requirements on 32-bit, I want to say 4 gig or something, very small. And then on 64-bit, it was terabytes. So something that you probably won't touch in most apps.
Well, I guess more like the minimums, like how.
When you need to get it to run?
Yeah, I mean, and just how much does it keep in memory? I guess I remember at Lone Star, I think it was one of
Jim?
you guys. Yeah, he said it has some pretty. It'll eat some memory. It'll eat what it has.
Do you have any idea what
allocated,
instances we're running on?
Like we're running on a 7 gig EC2 instance, and when you look at the memory usage, it looks like it's taking the whole thing, but it's like this memory map file deal. So I think it will take what you allow it to take.
Right.
Kind of the way that it's really appearing is probably not what's going on exactly.
Yeah, that
I
memory
know it's not using 7 gigs of memory, right?
Right.
It's appearing that this memory is maxed. So I think it's, I mean, if you let the big dog eat there, it'll take it. But we can run it on a whole lot less than that. Whatever the smallest server you can.
Yeah, I don't have
it'll work.
7 gigs of mine.
You might do what Memcache does and just allocate it all and have it on
So,
memory.
so like if
That's
you,
the huge issue.
yeah, like your database is small and you don't need that much memory, it'll work on 32-bit with low memory.
Right.
But I think it was, once we got databases that could really figure it, even independent of food populations.
Right. One of the new things that is actually probably in 0.5.6 now, I haven't seen it, but I saw it was recently committed. It's a very basic thing, but I'm excited about is logging. So that you can see your queries fly by the console just like you can for MySQL and Rails. And they look different. They're JavaScript hashes. They're not SQL statements, but at least you can see what's going on.
Yeah, when I write a kind of a more complicated SQL query for reports or something with like millions of rows, lots of joins, when it's first time it's always real slow, and then I have to use explain and really dig into what the query is doing to find out how to make it faster. And that's all based on the static schema. What tools do I use?
Mongo Sniff is one that I didn't use. You guys just peer into the database to see what's going on. And then when you crank up Mongo See if I can do that real quick. Let's see if I can get that there. Is it just Command plus? So, the other tab. Hold on a second. Flying over my shoulder. All right, so this is the console, right? Not the console, the output of the terminal. So when I run a query, it'll get dumped here. When I ran that, that's just with the default command line arguments. If I pass -v, -vv, -vvv, the levels of verbosity that I can pass to it, it'll you can even tell it only log queries that are longer than X milliseconds, right? So that's another tool that you can see, just to see the slow running.
So do you find it straightforward, like it is in SQL, to figure out what's causing a query to be slow?
For the most part, yeah, but we're not building very complicated queries like that. Although, anybody used search logic from the binary logic guys? So search logic is this Rails plugin that allows you to build dynamic queries like that pretty easily. And your form fields map to these hashes, and the hashes get converted to SQL. I'd like at some point to investigate porting that to Mongo, because those hashes don't need to be ported to SQL, those just need to be passed to Mongo, right? It would be a great use case for that, because the nested hashes would work really nicely for that. Any other questions?
How is it as far as like backing up and restoring? Like, what do you guys do to make sure that it's backed up and all that?
We're just taking the Mongo dump and out to S3, right?
Yeah, so we have, it depends on what your server configures, but it does either an EBS snapshot of the whole thing, or you can do a Mongo dump and split it out to S3. Do whatever you want, but the dump and the restore process works.
And there's no server affinity with that. So one of the Floxy sites we run is GoTwit, and they've got an obscene amount of people in their directory and the tweets that come across. And so I think just in their database in the last few months, they hundreds of thousands of tweets, and we had a long-running query, and I was trying to figure it out. Didn't really want to bang on the pro server to do it. So we'll take a Mongo dump, just that collection, restore it to a new database, just that collection, and play with my query until I figured out the problem. In another case, in TweetSaver, we got bit by a Mongo mapper upgrade where our database actually got corrupted. And actually, we had hundreds of thousands of tweets in the still. And I was able to, we had dupes in there. We were storing the ID as an array, so the unique constraint wasn't following. Long story short, I was able to pull down the data, clean up the data locally, and then push that back into the collection, transparent to the application.
Can you do those dumps concurrently with it running, or did you have to take it down?
Yeah, it's a hot backup. A Mongo dump is hot.
Right. And we're not even getting, I'll be honest, we're, for most of our apps, we're not even running master slave type configurations, which you can do as well. Do a lot of your dirty work in the slave, right?
What kind of performance are you seeing versus MySQL when it's not all memory? So if you have a small instance of Mongo's obviously the disk, are you seeing a lot higher performance than like a key index?
You have any apples to apples comparisons in your head?
Yeah, that's a hard one because MySQL is really good at doing reads.
Right.
And what we're doing is reading tweets. So,
and that's another thing.
For us, it's not really, it's not a factor as far as.
It's not a straight comparison, because going back to the memory map files, so in Rails you've got cache it, right? You don't have that in Mongo. It's not that sophisticated from a Rails standpoint, but it's just hitting memory. It's not going to the disk anytime. So a lot of times it's not that big a deal, because you can read the queries, you know, the sub.
Like on my laptop, it doesn't have that much memory to take up. It's way faster than Rails. So I never really get mad at the database side of things.
Most of the time, our problem's still in the view. tell you the truth, with Mongo.
When you create your class, put your keys on it, right? And that basically defines your dynamic schema.
Right.
How do you handle when you remove and add keys to your class? When you add a key, does that just create another document?
So
Or
if you, that question's kind of in two parts. There's one level of behavior that happens at the Mongo shell level. So basically whatever JavaScript type, you can do dynamic assignments. I can say, since it's a JavaScript object, I can say, user.foo equal bar. And it's going to give me a new dynamic property. And the type is basically whatever duck type.
But all the previous objects don't have that. It's only
That's right.
when you resave it again that it adds that additional field to that
Right.
record document.
Right.
What about when you remove records? Because you've got all these objects that have these fields that are no longer used.
Those fields are only used from the Mongo mapper as a convenience deal to basically enumerate. All these are glorified hashes, so just to get dot notation, right? He doesn't, if I recall correctly, and this could have changed, use any sort of method missing or anything to automatically figure out new fields. But if you
have to
did
manually prune everything, remove a key.
Like it could be a hash, and then you change it to an array, and all the other guys are short hash.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. There's no, that's the asymmetric part of the data storage. It doesn't really care. No other questions? Cool. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.